Right, hello everybody. Today's CPD, we are focusing on feedback that moves forward. So, let's have a look. The first thing that we need to do is just have a look at the CPD calendar for the next few weeks so everybody knows what we're doing. So obviously we started this half term with the LAT. Then last week we had Nathan and the emotional logic. This week, we're doing feedback as moving forward. Next week, we're going to be moving on to more looking at PERMs and how we do personalised feedback within our school. Then we have another LAT inset, so LAT subject groups. And then the final week before Easter, we're going to meet up in our teams, and we're going to do the planning the summer term, making sure we've got everything ready, having a look at the mock-up books, doing a clarification of thinking, etc. Okay, so first of all, we just need to have a think about what is feedback. So this is a quote taken by Misa, and there's no date for this. It says, feedback is an objective description of a student's performance intended to guide future performance. Unlike evaluation, which judges performance, feedback is the process of helping our students assess their performance, identify areas where they're right on target, and provide them with tips on what they can do in the future to improve in areas that need correcting. Here's another one by Butler and Wynne, and they say feedback is information with which a learner can confirm, add to, overwrite, tune, or restructure information in memory, whether that information is domain knowledge, metacognitive knowledge, beliefs about self and tasks, or cognitive tactics and strategies. So that's the general term of what feedback is. So now what we're going to do is just have a look at our Mayflower total teaching, and we're going to deconstruct it. So pull each part of the main diagram apart, and then just remind ourselves about what each part is and think really carefully about how, when, and where we use feedback within. So remember, this is our pedagogy. This is our Mayflower pedagogy, and it's called Mayflower Total Teaching. And we always start from the outside in of this diagram. So the first thing that is built up of our Mayflower Total Teaching would be our PLB. Then it's the 4 C's, then it's the 5 R's and the AFL loop, and then it is the Total Teaching Triangle, which is our triad teaching. Okay, so the very first thing that we just need to think about is how, when we're looking at our PLB, so this is an example of the new PLB that we have in our classrooms, how do we use feedback within our PLB? So just take a couple of seconds really just to have a think through about how, when we're talking to the children and we're using our PLB, how we use feedback. Okay, move on to the next one. So the next one is our 4 C's. So creating a can-do attitude, the class plan, the curriculum, and communication. Those are our 4 C's that are again part of our Mayflower pedagogy. So we need to think about how we use feedback within our 4 C's. So how do we use feedback for the PLB, and how do we use feedback for the 4 C's? This is what we looked at in depth before half term. These are the 5 R's. So recognise, record, report, review, and respond. This is the AFL loop. So it's never ending, it goes round and round. And we always start here on the very bottom left-hand straight line, and it goes round, clockwise, round. So how and when, why and where do we use feedback within the 5 R's? Okay, so when we're recognizing, what do we do to feedback? When we're recording, reporting, reviewing and responding, what do we do? How do we structure our feedback? These are just points for you to be thinking about throughout today and next week, please. And then on to our triad teaching, our roles. So when we plan, do and review, when we've each got our role within the classroom, how do I, if I'm taking on the teacher role, how do I feedback? If I'm taking on the reteaching role, the reactive, the responsive role, how do I feedback? What do we do? And of course, this is what we do to feedback. At Mayflower, we feedback via our PERMS. And PERMS stands for praise, enhance, respond, measure, and share. So that's just a little bit of recapping about our Mayflower pedagogy and how feedback fits with our Mayflower pedagogy. So we will go into more detail with that next week. I just wanted to bring that to our attention first. So on to a little bit of theory for us. So this is Hattie and Timperley's model of feedback, done quite a way back now in 2009. Basically, the purpose, they say, is to reduce discrepancies between current understandings and performance and a desired goal. So the discrepancies can be reduced by teachers when we provide appropriate challenges and specific goals, or when we assist students to reach them through effective strategies. And the students, so the pupils, how are discrepancies reduced? They're reduced by increased effort and employment of more effective strategies, or abandoning, blurring, or lowering the goals. And the effective feedback answers. So these are 3 ways of feeding back. You can feed up. So where am I going? So that's setting people goals. Where am I going? I'm feeding up. Feeding back. How am I going to do this? And feeding forward, where am I going? Where is this going to take me? What can I do next? And each feedback question works at 4 levels. So there is a task level. So how well are the tasks understood and actually performed? There's the process level. So the process needed to understand and actually be able to do the tasks. The self-regulation level, so the metacognition, the self-monitoring, the directing and the regulating of actions. And the self level, so as a child or even as us when we receive feedback, how do we personally evaluate that and what are we going to do about it? What are the next steps? So that is the Hattie and Timperley's model of feedback. So what I'd like you to do now, just spend, well, 3 or 4 minutes having a look at this and think about feedback. Think about any concerns that a pupil might have regarding feedback, any concerns that us as teachers have about giving or receiving feedback, and also any concerns that parents may have about their child receiving, acting on, or giving feedback. So it is 10 past. If we just do 3 or 4 moments now, if you could just talk in your teams about it, and then we'll come back together and we'll have a look to see what a big study shares.
Eve, do you mean teachers receiving feedback as a teacher or teachers giving feedback to pupils?
Teachers giving feedback to pupils. So this one is primarily all about feedback for pupils. We'll just have about another minute and then we'll come back together. We don't need that long. Okay, so if we start back, if somebody from yellow block could feed back for me, please, what you think.
Hello, can you hear us?
I can.
Wonderful. We were saying for early years, for pupil concerns, first we'd say understanding for some of our pupils. They wouldn't quite understand the feedback, so we have to think carefully about how we'd share that with them. We've said time, because we all know there's a million things to fit into a day, and sometimes some of our children just take a lot more time than we can give. And then self-regulation again for our pupils, where some of our children would get really upset if I said to them, I'd like you to up level that, I'd like you to try that again. For teacher concerns, we've only listed time for now, and then for parental concerns, we've listed communication, lack of communication, but time again as well.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. I think communication is the key one, isn't it? And like you say, for the pupil concerns, the understanding, that's what I think too. Thank you. Red, would you like to feed back, please? Somebody from red block.
Yeah, we kind of, as all centered around sort of worry and anxiety, really. So the pupils would be worried about failure. So the feedback would be construed as failure, perhaps, and not actually seeing it as constructive, but a criticism.
Yeah.
Teachers, we had about the pitch and the appropriateness of the feedback, making sure that it's relevant to the child's understanding and ability. And parents, it was they were concerned about the manner of your feedback, and you know, something just get a little bit funny about, well, why are you feeding that back to my daughter, my son? So just the tone and manner that you're using for the feedback.
Yeah, I totally agree with you as well there. Absolutely. Sometimes the pupils can take it the wrong way, can't they? Absolutely. Yeah. And teacher, like you say, so important to match feedback to the children. And yeah, parents can misunderstand. It's really good. Thank you. Anyone from blue?
Hello. So we said for pupil concerns, we said they might worry that it's not constructive feedback, and they might see it as a criticism on themselves. Which could damage self-esteem, so it could be more detrimental.
Yeah.
Teacher concerns, we said workload again, like yellow block did, and time. And I think, like red block said, for parental concerns, we talked about the tone. Is the teacher using the correct tone? Are they wording the feedback correctly to make sure my child isn't sort of taking this to heart?
Yeah, absolutely, and totally agree with you as well. Thank you. And green block?
Yeah, we said for pupils, possibly that they're not understanding the feedback. They might perceive it as a failure, and some of them may just not want more work. They're quite happy with the amount they've produced in the first place, especially in year 5 and 6 when it's a longer piece of writing. Teachers, we said we might have a concern about whether or not it's effective enough, and therefore is it a good use of time and workload.
Yeah.
And parental, whether parents would find it constructive and whether they think it's personalised enough for their child.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. So this here is this is taken from this book that I would recommend that you can read if you have time. The Feedback Pendulum by Michael Childs, and the foreword is by Chris Moyes. It's really good, and it's really nice, and it's it's actually really readable. So you should have a look if you get a chance. He did a study, so Michael Charles did a study very recently, 2021, and this is what he's found. So pupil concerns, feedback is not clear and they don't understand. The feedback does not show them how to improve their work. The purpose is unclear. There's too much feedback, but on the other hand, there could be too little. The feedback is too late to be helpful. The criteria is unclear and the feedback comments are demotivating and there's little opportunity to discuss the feedback. And the teacher concerns. So the pupils do not read the feedback because they're more interested in the grade. Pupils aren't interested in receiving feedback. Providing feedback to pupils is too time consuming, difficult to decide how much feedback is actually useful and relevant for the pupils. Unsure of the best format to provide feedback to pupils. So should it be verbal? Should it be written? Pupils do not know what to focus on from teacher feedback comments, and we do not know how to get pupils to understand the criteria. And parents, there are too many subjects to grasp what my child needs to do. The comments to my child are unclear. I want to know whether my child is on or off target, which is a really big one. That seems to be what parents really want to know. And I want to know what my child needs to do to improve and achieve their target grade. So what we're going to do now is have a quick look at some of the walkthroughs and work through, because this is a walkthrough module, feedback that moves forward. So this is by Tom Sherrington and Oliver Cavaliglioli again. So these are their 5 main steps that they think feedback moves forward. So focusing forwards, keeping it positive and specific, matching the message to the student, avoiding the sat-nav syndrome, and reducing feedback over time. So each one of those 5 steps we'll look into in a few minutes. So they say feedback plays a central role in securing students' learning, supporting them how to deepen knowledge and understanding or improve performance. Effective feedback needs to be understood and accepted and to be actionable so that students can use it to secure improvements. And part of this relies on feedback providing motivation to apply effort alongside specific strategies. So we'll do in a second, well, in a few moments, we'll go through each of the separate 5 steps. But first, before we move on to really looking at the walkthroughs in depth, we really need to know about this man. So this man here is Dylan Wiliam, and he basically, you can read a short bio there about him. But he basically works all about formative assessment, which what this is. Feedback is part of the formative assessment. And his 5 strategies embedded classroom formative assessment, which he did a few years ago now, and he keeps tweaking, but he comes back to these same 5 every time. So clarifying, sharing and understanding learning intentions and success criteria, eliciting evidence of learners' achievement, providing feedback that moves learning forward, activating students as instructional resources for one another, and activating students as owners of their own learning sciences. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to stop sharing this screen, hopefully for a moment. And you should, in a second, be able to see a YouTube clip of Dylan Wiliam. So Ellie, can you see my YouTube screen?
I could get myself off mute. Sorry. Yes, I can see it.
I was like, oh, is anybody there?
I was trying to nod. Sorry. Yes, I can see it. I just couldn't get myself off mute.
Okay, fantastic. So hopefully this will work. Make notes if you want to. It's just under 15 minutes long is this video, but it is so very relevant to what we're doing that we really do need to watch it. So fingers crossed.
Feedback is one of the most contentious issues in all of formative assessment. And as you've heard, the crucial issue about feedback is that it moves learning forward, that feedback is forward-looking rather than backward-looking. And this was very clearly illustrated in a study undertaken by Ruth Butler and her colleagues. They had a group of about 260 students in 12 classrooms in Israel. And this analysis focuses on the highest and the lowest achieving students in each class. Now, what's important to remember about this study is that it was very well controlled. So in each one of the 12 classrooms, the students got the same teaching from the same teachers, working to the same aims and using the same curriculum materials. The only differences between the classrooms was the kind of feedback they were given as they worked. So in 4 of the classrooms, as the students worked, they were given scores. When the books were taken in, the worst piece of work was given a score of 40, the best piece of work was given a score of 99, and the others were scaled in between. In 4 of the classrooms, the students were just given comments as they worked. They weren't great comments, they were just things like, you thought of a lot of good examples here, maybe you could think of a few more. And in the 3rd batch of 4 classrooms, the students got the score and the comment side by side. So what happened? Well, this is shown on slide 25. The students given scores made no progress. The post-tests they took, they got the same scores as the pre-test, so they learned nothing. And when the researchers asked the students, do you want to do more work like this? The students who got high scores said, yes, please. And the students who got low scores said, no, thank you, let's do something different. The students given comments made a 30% improvement from the pre-test to the post-test. They didn't know that, of course, because they hadn't seen any scores. But when the researchers asked the students, do you want to carry on with this? The students who got high scores and the students who got low scores both wanted to carry on. So the question I'd like you to discuss with your colleagues or your neighbors is this: what do you think happened for the students given both scores and comments? So if you look at slide 26, here's a reminder of the outcomes for the other students. So the students given scores made no progress, high scores were positive, low scores were negative. Students given comments, 30% improvement in achievement, and all the students positive. So what do you think happened for the students given both scores and comments? Take 3 minutes to discuss this in your groups.
We're not doing a group discussion.
Okay, so typically the responses are quite varied. Optimists tend to go for A. It's the best of both worlds, isn't it? That you'll get the gain of the 30% and you'll get the positive attitudes. Many teachers think that B will happen, that you'll get a gain of 30%, but the attitudes will be polarized. So the gain of 30% comes from the comments, but the negative effect of the scores makes the students with low achievements feel less positive about the work. C is an averaging effect the other way. The rationale behind C is that they get no improvement because of the scores, but somehow the comments make them feel okay about getting a bad score. And not surprisingly, C is the least often chosen because it doesn't seem very likely. And D is the worst of all possible worlds. It's just the same as the score. And what many people are mystified and surprised to discover is that in this experiment, when it was conducted, D is what happened. The students given both scores and comments did no better, did exactly the same, in fact, as the students just given scores. This is curious because across the world, the most common form of grading practice is that we give kids scores or grades and a comment. And this study and others like it, this is not an isolated example, show that if you're going to give children carefully detailed diagnostic comments and then go and put a score or a grade on it, you're wasting your time. Because the children who get the high scores don't need to read the comments, and the children who get the low scores don't want to. You'd be better off just giving a score. They won't learn anything, but you will save yourselves so much time marking. Now, an illustration of what's going on here is found in another study on slide 27 by the same research team. And here there were 8 classrooms. In one classroom, as they worked, the students were given comments. In a second classroom, they were given grades. In a third classroom, they were given written praise. And in the fourth classroom, they were given no feedback whatsoever. Now, the students in groups 2 and 3, the students given grades and praise, made no more progress than the children given absolutely no feedback at all. The only students who made significantly greater progress were the students given comments. so much for this idea that children need to know where they are. Well, of course, children know where they are most of the time. What they don't need is to be reminded of it all the time. And yet, if they can get it, they want that feedback. So in many schools, we've created a trap. Children won't work unless their work is given a grade. And yet the grade is harmful. It's as if they are the junkies and we are the pushers. We have to find a way of getting our kids unhooked off grades. And I don't know how we do it, whether it's a course of methadone or going cold turkey, I just don't know. But I'm very clear that certainly for children in primary school and early secondary school, grades are completely unnecessary. We'd be far better off just writing reports to parents about what the kids can do and what they can't do, because of the way the reports direct attention. In the previous study, where students, in the 4 classrooms where students were given both the scores and the comments, clearly the first thing that a student looks at when they're given both a score and a comment is the score. What's quite interesting is what they look at next. And it's not the comment. When they're given both a score and a comment, what they look at second, of course, is somebody else's score. What you get. And as soon as you get the what you get in your classroom, you can forget the learning. Because now the ego is engaged and all the students' energy is directed towards protecting the self-esteem. And that's what this study showed very clearly. Giving grades and giving praise had no impact on students' achievement, but it did increase the level of ego involvement. The level of ego involvement in the classrooms given grades and praise was higher, whereas the level of ego involvement in the classrooms given comments was the same as in the classrooms given no feedback at all. So the crucial issue here is to keep the ego out of learning. And this is very powerfully illustrated in the study shown on slide 28. Now, I've just chosen 2 studies so far, and you could accuse me of picking 2 studies that suited my point of view. And that's why this study is so powerful. 2 researchers at Rutgers University, Kluger and Denisi, decided to look at every single study that had ever been done on feedback. They went back to 1905. They found over 3,000 research reports and studies on the effects of feedback, 2,500 journal articles, and about 500 technical reports. Unfortunately, some of these weren't very well conducted or reported. Some of these studies had only a single participant. In some cases, they'd given some students feedback, but they changed other things. So it wasn't possible to work out whether it was the feedback or something else that was changed. In other studies, there wasn't a control group. And so they eliminated all the studies where it wasn't possible to attribute the outcomes unambiguously to feedback. What they were surprised to discover was that out of the original 3,000 studies, only 131 were methodologically rigorous. And out of these 131 studies, they found that on average, feedback did increase performance. But what they were very surprised to discover was that in 50 out of the 131 studies, 38%, giving people feedback actually made their performance worse. In other words, in almost 2 out of every 5 carefully controlled scientific studies, giving people feedback made their performance worse than had you given them no feedback at all. You'd been better off shutting up in 38% of the cases. And this obviously puzzled the researchers greatly, and they decided to investigate what was significant about the feedback where it lowered performance. And what they found was that it was basically ego involving. You know, you're a good employee, you're a bad employee. You get a raise this year, you don't get a raise this year. You get an A, you get an F. And what they found was that people who got high evaluations didn't get any better, and those who got low evaluations got slightly worse. The feedback that was effective in raising performance had 2 characteristic features. One, it told people what to do. And secondly, and perhaps more importantly, it told them how to go about it. In other words, feedback contained a recipe for future action. So in terms of our classroom practices, slide 29 details some practical techniques we can use to promote more effective feedback. The big idea here is that feedback should cause thinking. If your feedback causes a thinking reaction, a cognitive reaction, then there's a chance that some learning might happen. If your feedback causes an emotional reaction, then there is no chance that learning will take place. So the teacher's goal must be to keep the feedback focusing on the thinking rather than the emotional reaction. So one way to do this is comment-only marking or grading. It's still difficult to get the students to read the comments, however. One teacher who I worked with in North London, called Charlotte Kerrigan, she has been using comment-only marking for a long time, but she still wasn't happy with how much attention the students were giving to her comments. So she decided to try something different. So the students had done an essay on Shakespeare, and rather than writing the comments at the bottom of the student's essay, she wrote them on strips of paper. And each group of 4 students received back their 4 essays and the 4 strips of paper. And their task was to match the comments to the essays. And that is smart, because what she's managed to do is to slow down the emotional reaction. So when a student picks up one of those comments, they're reading it to find out what it says, not what it says about them. So slowing down that emotional reaction so the students are focusing on the content rather than what it says about them as a person is an important first step in creating good feedback. Focus grading. Don't comment on everything. Don't correct everything that's wrong with students' work. I did an interview with a girl in year 5 or 6, I think it was, and she said something that really quite surprised me. She said, when you get a lot of feedback, it means your work wasn't very good. I said, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, if you do really good work, you just get A, excellent. But if your work isn't as good as that, then there's lots of teachers' comments all over your work. So in other words, this student had come to believe that the more feedback you got, the worse your work must have been. In other words, good kids do not get feedback. So we thought about how we could actually deal with this. And one approach that a history teacher has been using is to put numbered circles at various points in the student's response. And at the bottom, the teacher writes out 3 questions, question 1, question 2, question 3, relating to each of the numbered circles in the student's text. And then when they come into the lesson, they know that the first thing they're going to have to do is answer those 3 questions. Doesn't matter whether you're the slowest kid in the class or the most able kid in the class. Every lesson, when your books have been marked, starts with responding to the question the teacher has asked. And what that teacher has managed to do is to get rid of that idea of feedback as being an autopsy or a post-mortem. And now feedback is what's next. So actually students know that when they come back, their books having been marked, they will sit down and they will answer those 3 questions. If you give kids scoring rubrics or scoring guides or mark schemes, then make sure that you refer back to these things when you're giving feedback. Many teachers give kids feedback that doesn't refer back to the marking scheme or the scoring guide that they've earlier shared with the students. Now, these work very well in text-based subjects, but as maths teachers and science teachers have said to us, you can't do this in maths, because if you tick 15 of these equations as correct and put a cross next to 5 others, the students can work out for themselves they got 15 out of 20, whether you tell them or not. So we suggested that they should instead say to the students, 5 of these are wrong. You find them, you fix them. In other words, feedback is leaving some work for the students to do. Rule 1 of teaching is never work harder than your students. Corollary of rule 1 is feedback should be more work for the recipient than the donor. I don't know a single teacher whose students spend as long taking on board the feedback they are given as it takes the teacher to provide it, and that needs to change. Feedback should be more work for the recipient than the donor. And this technique of 5 of these are wrong, you find them, you fix them, was taken then up by language arts teachers and English teachers. On a final draft of a piece of writing, you can put a dot in the margin every time there's something that needs correction. For the weaker students, you can put P for a punctuation error, G for grammar, S for spelling. But the important point is you're leaving work for the students to do. Feedback should be more work for the recipient than the donor. So not giving complete solutions. And then finally, retelling the assessment. As I mentioned earlier, in Japan, it's very common for a teacher to give the end of unit test before the end of the unit, and then she has time to use the information. So the big idea here is that as long as feedback is focusing forward, that feedback is collected with a view to what you do with that information immediately to make the learning better, you'll be able to focus the feedback on growth rather than on the negative impacts on students' well-being. Thank you.
Okay. I should be back with you now. So what are your thoughts about that? What are your key takeaways from Dylan William? Just really quickly, would anybody like to jump in and tell us what they're thinking?
I will. Kelly and I, to be honest, I wasn't really that impressed with him because it was stating quite a lot of obvious, which is that grades are more demotivating than actual comments and feedback, which we do. Unfortunately, it's the government, it's the system that says we have to grade. So, you know, SATs, benchmarking, Eve, sorry, but, you know, these are all things where children are given a level rather than an encouragement. So feedback, yes, we really like that. We talked about meaningful feedback. We like the idea of, for example, where he said you've got 5 mistakes, spot them.
Yeah, I like that too.
However, we also said at primary school, children find it really, really difficult to know what they've done wrong to correct. So even when you peer perms, they're working with a partner, but they don't really identify a lot of the key mistakes because they don't know what they're looking for in the first place. And they wouldn't have made that mistake if they did know what they were looking for. So.
Yeah, it depends, doesn't it? Like I tried it today, but I tried it, it was a situation, it was TT Rockstars. So I quickly looked through round them and I said, 3 of these are wrong. Can you find which ones are wrong? And they went through and they could find them in that situation. But you're right, in other situations, it's probably because they haven't understood. And so it depends, doesn't it? But yeah, I take your point. And you're right, things like benchmarking, they all want to know what colour they're on.
And it was interesting how he said about how they compared themselves. They weren't particularly that bothered about what they'd got. It was the comparison then between themselves and their peers. That was what became most important to them. And I would completely agree with that.
Yeah.
It's like, then you know your position in the hierarchy, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you as well. Thank you. That's really good. That's really good feedback. Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in and tell us what they thought? What about Lorna, what did you think?
So I've written down about when he said that 40% or 2 in 5, whatever it was, of feedback actually ended up having a negative impact on the child. And we were trying to come up with situations where that would happen. One of the ones we said was in writing, if a child's not included something and you're asking them to look for it, well, if they haven't included it, possibly because they don't fully understand what it is, then you end up in that rabbit hole of you're explaining what they need to do, but then you need to explain another thing, and then you need to explain another thing. And I think that's what he means by, like, that's where it's becoming too much for them. And actually, sometimes they just don't know what you've asked for, and you just need to bench that and come back to it at another time rather than trying to address everything.
Yeah.
And I think as well, they're too focused on the feedback, and they can almost obsess over the feedback to the point where let's say, can you include a sentence with an exclamation mark in it? And then every bit of writing then has an exclamation mark. Every sentence has an exclamation mark, and it takes away from their writing. They're obsessed with the feedback.
Yeah, lovely. I'm just going to go back and share this PowerPoint. So we'll have a look and see. Yes, here it is. Phew. Let's move on to the walkthroughs. So we've done him. So here we are. So feedback that moves forward. So we should use assessments to identify areas for improvement in performance or gaps in understanding, which of course we do all the time, don't we? Just take benchmarking for an example. Rather than describing the past performance, focus on actions that they can take to improve in the future. And feedback needs to be given partway through a learning cycle and not at the end. Let's have a look. So just have a quick think. How successful are you currently in creating feedback and improvement cycles? Does any of your feedback arrive too late to be acted on? So just a couple of minutes to have a chat about that, and then we'll feedback from teams, please. Okay, so if we start with yellow again, please. Somebody from yellow, feedback to me, please. But I would imagine a lot of your feedback would be verbal. So I would imagine that yours would be pretty much hands-on while the children are doing it, or...
Yeah, that's right, Eve. A lot of ours is verbal. We were saying, actually, we do phonics and writing together now. So we're saying that it's really successful feedback for one group a day, because they have that, we have the live lesson and then they have the E straight away and we call them back for them to answer it. But it's not the most effective way for all of the children, would be for every group to have that, but it's not manageable with time. It's impossible to be able to pull them all back and have that verbal discussion with each table. So they get that once a week, but we're saying actually it's a shame you can't give that to every child every day.
Yeah, there's just not enough hours in the day, is there?
No, there's not.
Thank you. Red, somebody from Red, please. What do you think?
I'll go on this. Oh, sorry, I just saw Jess talking to. Sorry. Shall I? I'll go. Okay. So I was thinking about the question of does your feedback arrive too late? And I was thinking that in the sense of when I'm in the classroom and you're in control of when that is happening, I don't think I've come across that. But I definitely came across that during remote learning, when I would set an assignment to come in for like their first draft of their writing, and I would say, okay, I need it on the Friday so that I can give my feedback, send you your feedbacks, and on the Monday you can start redrafting. And then if I didn't get some of those back and they kind of missed the time that I was giving the feedback, and then it came in like halfway through the week on the Wednesday, I used to have to try and make the decision, do I give all of that feedback now, or is that actually going to be wasted because they're so far behind everybody else? I hope that makes sense. I mean, I always did give it to them because I felt that they needed it, but there were times when I then got their final drafts and I thought, you gave me your first draft so late that you didn't then act upon what I gave you.
Yeah, it's kind of gone, hasn't it then? Absolutely. Yeah, I agree, Ellie. I think that certainly in Blue, we had some discussions, didn't we, Lorna, about how long do you wait when you were doing the remote learning for the feedback, when you've got it in, what as if they're handing it in, but you've already moved on and things like that. So yeah, absolutely, Ellie, I agree. I'm just going to move on because I'm aware that it's 1:45 already. So basically, the walkthroughs are suggesting that we keep our feedback positive and specific. So framed in a language that is positive and encouraging, tell the students all the things they're succeeding at, but be specific as possible. So rather than suggesting a student should write a better conclusion, specify how the conclusion could be improved. And if you think back to our PERMS model, that would be what we would do with for our P. As Nathan said earlier, it's really important that we match the message to the student. So feedback only succeeds if they can use it to increase their effort or raise their aspirations. So some students need careful nurturing and respond badly to perceived criticism, which is what we said at the beginning. So that's perfect. Others need a strong push to lead them to increase their effort. and just have a think. We don't need to talk about this now, but if you could just think about the children in your class, when you're thinking about your feedback, who needs to be nurtured and who needs to be pushed? We all know who these children are, but it's just sometimes good to bring them to the forefront of our minds. So we need to avoid the sat-nav syndrome. So this was really interesting. A sat-nav system gives continuous directions, making it possible to travel from A to B without bothering to learn the route. So when we give feedback focusing on changing students' capacity to produce excellent work and less on producing a specific exemplary piece. So we need to give the prompts, but we need to leave the students to take improvement steps independently. So if you have just 2 minutes now to think about what do we mean by sat-nav syndrome. If you think about us in class giving our feedback, when could we possibly do sat-nav syndrome without meaning to, because we are all humans and this is what we do. We want to help, but sometimes are we helping them, the children, too much? Just have a quick think about some examples of when we do that, and then we'll just ask very quickly blue and green to feedback, because yellow and red fed back on the last question. It's 2 minutes. Okay, anybody from blue? Would anybody like to feedback? What do we mean by sat-nav syndrome? And if you think of any examples where sat-nav syndrome might have happened, please.
Yeah, so we said that sat-nav syndrome could be when you give feedback that is really, really guided and it's too guided, and it almost does it for them.
Yeah, and we have to be careful, don't we? Because we break their feedback down into small steps, but sometimes we're telling them exactly what they need to do, and we're missing the opportunity for them to really self-regulate and think about what they need to do. Yeah, I totally agree, Dan. Thank you.
We also have to be aware that by, in true sat-nav style, by suggesting there's only one route, when actually there can be 3 or 4 different ways of getting to the same point. So
absolutely,
you're not allowing them to think creatively about how they're going to respond.
Yeah,
I'd just add to that as well.
Of course, go for it.
I think it was we mentioned as well about not giving the children enough thinking time. So when maybe we set the question, and I think it leads back to the questioning as well. We set the question and we just jump in maybe too quickly. So we are giving them the instruction rather than allowing them the thinking time. So just building on what Helen said, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And just one more point that we sort of kind of made was there is a very, very fine balance though between scaffolding and over supporting.
It is, and I think that's where that nurturing or push comes into it as well, because we know our children, sometimes some need a little bit more scaffolding and others do need a push, but you're right, there's a fine balance, I think, between scaffolding and just too much, just not letting them be independent. I agree. Yeah, thank you. So that leads on to this about how the research suggests that we should be reducing the feedback over time, so reducing the amount. So as students engage in independent practice and gain confidence, which obviously is what we want them to do, and we have to try and reduce the detail in the feedback given, allowing more struggle time before offering feedback. We need to train the students to generate as much self-assessed feedback as possible, referring success criteria, exemplars of standards, and worked answers. So if we just think about us, when we're learning something new, when we've had to really think about it, and it's been difficult and it has pushed us, that is when we are really learning and we're evaluating all the time, and the new learning is we're remembering it because we've had to work hard to do that. So when we reduce the feedback, when we reduce if we've over scaffold, and when we reduce that back step by step, obviously the children are having to work out their answers by themselves, and so their learning becomes more effective. So very quickly, what strategies do we use to reduce feedback over time? And are pupils given scope for generating their own feedback using exemplars and success criteria? So I'll just leave that open. So if anybody wants to jump in now, that would be great. So what strategies do we use to reduce feedback over time? And are pupils given scope for generating their own feedback using exemplars and success criteria?
If we were just saying that we don't feel that we do reduce feedback over time, I think year 5, 6 would agree that they are giving their children a lot of feedback. It might be more independent feedback, but those children are still getting a lot of feedback. I don't think we're reducing it over time. I wouldn't say that foundation are getting more feedback than year 6.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone agree? I don't know if that's right.
No, we definitely agree. I think one strategy that we're trying to use to maybe reduce the amount of, maybe not the amount of feedback we're giving, but the time it takes us to give feedback, rather that way instead. But we are certainly giving, it's no less than what the feedback. I give quite a bit of verbal feedback, and I think that reduces the time that I take to give feedback, if that makes sense. But no, the amount that I give, and Sarah will probably agree, hopefully, is no different to what basically what Lorna would say.
Even within a year, I don't feel like I give less feedback in the summer term than I do in the autumn. Yeah. I feel like I give quite a lot.
Is that because of our PERMS model? Perhaps because of the way that we do the praise, enhance, respond, measure, share?
Yeah, probably. And there's an expectation that we've still got to give that feedback.
Yeah, I think there's so much new learning that happens as well, because we have new projects every term. There's always so much new. So although we do the recall each term, it's almost like resetting again, I find. So a lot of the feedback is because it's something new that they've not seen before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or sometimes maybe when it's talking about reducing the feedback over time, perhaps it means when we do our small steps, sometimes at the very beginning, if a child has got a misconception, you might give them quite detailed small steps, and then you reduce it. I think it's maybe thinking that way, as opposed to us. I don't think it's thinking that we give them less. We don't give them less PERMS because they're going up through the year groups. I think it means it's what Helen Taylor was saying about that fine line between the scaffolding and giving them the feedback. Perhaps, I don't know. It's good question. So we can explore more of this next week, because next week we'll take the feedback and we'll make it more specific to our PERMS model. Just want to show you a few things that are available for us that I've started to make. So I've started to make this, well, I don't know what it is. I suppose it's a collection of video support. So it's called Professional Development Video Support Skill Set. So obviously the mindset, obviously about how children learn, and all the emotional logic that we've been doing with Nathan, that would be mindset. So skill set is all about the research. So I've just put this together and it is building up. Basically, what I've done is for every CPD that we've done so far this year, so there's Mayflower Pedagogy, which we're still adding to, so Malta making videos to add to for each bit, so it's explaining the 5 R's, the 4 C's, etc. Then I've found a load of videos that are done by researchers and experts that are talking about, for example, tiered vocab. Then we've gone onto a load of questioning and checking for understanding. I've made them through for the importance of effective feedback, and then it goes on, so it continues in. So when we start talking about Shimomura's Marge, etc., there'll be videos to support motivation and attention and relation, etc. So these are there ready for you to access, and they're on the CPD team. So when you go onto CPD team, if you click File at the top. You should be able to access these, and basically I can't do this because I snipped it, so I can't really show you, but you click on that and it will come up with the YouTube video of a researcher or an author talking about what they have done for each of these parts. So it's just a little bit of extra support for us if we need to go back and have a look and remind ourselves. But the exciting thing is that, so with the mindset we've been doing with Nathan's emotional logic, this is the skill set, so all research based about what we're doing. The exciting bit is that we're going to create one of these for ourselves, which will be the tool set. So what I would like us to do is to start just when we do something, make a video of it, and then we can show people, we can collate them all together, and that will be how we do things at Mayflower. So it will be how we question, how we give our feedback, how we use our vocabulary, how we're using the 3 tiers of vocab displays that we have in our classrooms, any techniques. So over, well, the rest of this year and then probably going into next year, to be realistic, that's what we're going to do. So that should be really exciting and be fantastic for any new starters that are coming. So the whole package is there. This is what we do. Click on this link and you'll be able to see year 4 doing questioning, or something like this. So yeah, that would be really useful if we could start collecting the videos now. Just got a couple of books that I want to show you. So a lot of this was taken from this one, the Feedback Pendulum that I talked about earlier, and then also this one, which is a little thicker but also really good read and quite light actually for a CPD book. It's called Thanks for the Feedback. This is the book that Ollie C raves about on Twitter, about that this is the book that everybody should read. Everybody will learn so much from it. And I've read it, and to be fair, as an adult, it makes sense about all the different layers of feedback and how sometimes we take feedback, but we're thinking of evaluating, and we take it a little more personally than we should. So this is a really good book if you're interested in the theory behind the research and the things that work and things that we should avoid to do. And that is it. It is 1 minute to 5. Sarah, do you want to say anything, or Penny, before we finish? Okay, if not, we will finish now.
I was nodding, I'm sorry.
That's because I can't see anybody, so I don't know if anybody's there or not.
And then nodding away. Eve, thank you so much. It was really useful. I had to nip out for a bit, but Penny was in and she listened to the whole thing. Obviously, I'd already gone through it with you yesterday, so I know how useful it was. Yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you for those CPD the tool set videos. It's an incredible offer. Please have a look at them. They are so good, and you've put so much work into it, Eve. It's such a great package. My final thing to block, can I just ask everybody in block? I'm locking up tonight, so if you could lock all your doors and windows that you can. Obviously, you're going to have to leave, so leave from one door. But if you could lock all of the windows and doors around you, then that would be really helpful. Thank you. Okay, I think that's it, Eve. Thank you so much.